crimes at certain times of day when all the citizens retired tear their clothes off and perspire. You know, it's one of those rules that the greatest fools obey because the sun is far too sultry and one must avoid the ultraviolet rays. Pat like a boo, that's natives if you're interested. The natives grieve when the white men leave their huts because they're obviously, definitely nuts. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. The Japanese don't care. The Chinese wouldn't dare to. Hindus and Argentines sleep firmly from 12 to 1, but Englishmen detest a siesta. You know, in the Philippines, they have lovely screens to protect you from the glare. In the Malay states, there are hats, like plates, which the Britishers won't wear. At 12 noon, the natives swoon and no further work is done. But mad dogs and Englishmen go out to the midday sun. Oh, it's such a surprise for the Eastern eyes to see that though the English are effete, they're quite impervious to heat. When the white man rides, every native hides in glee, because the simple creatures hope he will impale his solar topee on the tree. Inhabiting hides the same natives. Pay no attention. Seems to shame when the English claim the earth.
The quintessential English gentleman, Noel Coward, was in fact born just 2 weeks before 1900 into a lower middle-class family in West London.
Yes, perfectly ordinary suburban middle-class background. My mother's family were all connected with the Navy, a great deal. But of course we hadn't got very much money, so it was sort of genteel poverty we lived in originally.
Dance, 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 little lady, youth is fleeting to the rhythm beating in your mind.
Almost from the cradle, Noel's ambitious mother saw star potential in her precocious son.
She completely ignored his education. He was on the stage from age dot almost. There was no impetus to do anything that a normal young boy would do. Noel was a stage-struck little boy who was up there singing, being brought down to perform for family evenings. And then it was just a natural progression to theatre.
I was trained when I was very young as a show-off, and I've continued triumphantly until this moment. My guiding light in the theatre, to the theatre, was the Daily Mirror, because it came out and said that in an attractive, talented and handsome boy wanted. So Mother and I had a brisk conference, and we decided I was talented, handsome, moot point, but we'd better have a try. And so I went and gave an audition to a lady called Miss Lilla Field. Then I sang a song called Liza Ann from the Orchid, and there was no piano, and so Mother la-la'd the chorus for me to do the dance. You see, I had to do the dance. I got the job.
Violet Coward's faith in her son was strengthened in 1912 when she went to see a fortune teller at the Colosseum who used items of clothing from people in the audience to divine the fortunes of their owners.
She had this sock in her hand, and the entire performance came to a grinding halt because her hands began to tremble, and she said, "Who is the owner of this sock? I must know who the owner of this sock is." And from the stalls came Auntie Violet's word, "Yes, right here, Mrs. Coward. Yes, but who actually wears the sock? Who is the owner of the sock? Mrs. Coward's son, Noel." Well, the woman said, "Mrs. Coward, I must tell you that your son Noel, the owner of this sock, is destined for extraordinary things. I am getting such a vibration from this sock that I cannot but believe that his career is going to be remarkable."
From the age of 11 onwards, Noel was acting regularly, but only in minor and supporting roles.
Regarding yours, dear Mrs. Worthington, of Wednesday the 23rd. Although your baby may be keen on a stage career, how can I make it clear this is not a good idea for her to hope, dear Mrs. Worthington, is on the face of it absurd. Her personality is not...
I had the luck, through the agents, Bellew and Stock, to be engaged by Charles Hawtry to play a page boy. He was absolutely wonderful to me. He taught me really everything I know about comedy. I still, when I'm faced with a tricky scene to play, I cast my mind back to what the governor would have done with it. He was wonderful.
On my knees, Mrs. Worthington. Please, Mrs. Worthington.
He continued learning his technique with Hawtry off and on for the next 6 years.
Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs.
Then when he was 17, he made a brief appearance in D.W. Griffith's silent film Hearts of the World. He'd become a professional actor, and his confidence in his ability was already immense.
Well, I think I remember meeting him in South Kensington at the house of some school friend of mine. I was still a schoolboy, and he was there as a guest. And I seem to remember he went and played the piano, and I thought he was rather bumptious and showing off, rather.
Stardom continued to elude him despite his many efforts, so he turned his hand to writing plays and reviews featuring himself. In 1924, aged 24, he wrote his third play, The Vortex.
My object in The Vortex was to write a good play with a whacking good part in it for myself. And I'm thankful to say, with a few modest reservations, that I think I succeeded.
His character was the son of a woman who made herself look ridiculous by trying to appear young and taking lovers who were half her age.
Originally, I had a great friend who had rather a flighty mother, and I was with him at a nightclub. And there she was with a young man. And the other people in our party at the nightclub started to laugh at her. And I thought how awful for him. I'd once went over and kissed her and said, hello, how are you, dear, etc., etc. And so they shut up. But it was a very bad moment. And I thought, how dreadful of a mother to put her son in such a position.
You're neurotic and ridiculous. Just because Bunty broke off your engagement, you think you can come in here and say wicked, cruel things to me.
You forget what I've seen tonight,
I
Mother.
don't care what you've seen tonight.
I've seen you make a vulgar, disgusting scene in your own house, and on top of that, humiliate yourself before a boy half your age. The misery of losing Bunty faded away when that happened. Everything is comparative, after all.
I did not humiliate
You ran up
myself.
the stairs after him because your vanity wouldn't let you lose him. It isn't that you love him. That would be easier. You never love anyone. You only love them loving you.
It can't be such a crime being loved. It can't be such a crime being happy.
You're not happy. You're never happy. You're fighting all the time to keep your youth and your looks. Because you can't bear the thought of living without them, as though it mattered in the end.
What does anything matter ever?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
I'm still young inside. I'm still beautiful. Why shouldn't I lead the life that I choose?
You're not young or beautiful.
It was an immediate success. It established me both as a playwright, as an actor, which was very fortunate, because up until that time, I had not proved myself to be so hot in either capacity.
Oh, tremendous. Everybody thought it was about drugs, which was not talked about in those days, and the sort of mother-son last act, like Hamlet, which was very powerful.
I can't bear anymore.
I have a slight confession to make.
Confession?
Yes.
Go away! Go away!
Look!
What do you mean? What is it?
Don't you know?
Nicky, it isn't... You have...
Why do you look so shocked?
Oh, my God.
What does it matter? That doesn't make it any better.
The audience had never seen anything like it. It dealt with taboo themes, was emotionally powerful, and it attacked the shallowness of upper-middle-class society, the very people who flocked to see it. Coward played in it for the first 10 months of its run before taking it to Broadway.
And soon after that, I was asked to go and understudy him in The Vortex. And I played in it for several weeks because he left, and he was very kind to me, but I was greatly in awe of him. And he was, of course, frightfully smart with dressing gowns in the wardrobe and sudden, huge success as the wicked young man of the moment.
With the success came a lot of pleasurable trappings. New suits, a car, silk shirts, an extravagant amount of dressing gowns and pajamas, and a still more extravagant amount of publicity. I was photographed, interviewed, photographed again. And on one occasion, sitting up in an over-elaborate bed, looking like a heavily doped Chinese illusionist. I've always felt that this photograph caused me a great deal of harm. Anyone looking at it could tell at a glance, with a certain justification, that I was a weedy sensualist in the last stages of physical and moral degeneration.
In fact, this degenerate soon monopolised British theatre. In 1925, he had 4 plays running simultaneously in the West End, and he owned his first Rolls-Royce at 26. Coward had created a style of theatre that was entirely his own.
He did invent himself. He was a... there was nobody... I think Kenneth Tynan said, in years to come, if people say he was a coward sort of person, everyone would know what they meant years afterwards. And he did invent himself, and also a kind of I don't know, morality and style, which was entirely his own and nobody else's, and owed nothing to anybody else either.
In the 8 years from 1924 to 32, he consolidated his style with plays like Hay Fever, Bittersweet, Private Lives, and Designed for Living. Coward starred in all of them. In Designed for Living, he played a part that the public were meant to think was just like him, a successful young playwright with no time for conventional middle-class life.
It's a knockout. It's magnificent. It'll run a year.
2 years.
3 years.
4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It'll run forever. Old ladies will be trampled to death, struggling to get into the pit. Women will have babies regularly in the upper circle bar during the big scene at the end of the second act.
Regularly as clockwork.
Daily Mail says it's daring and dramatic and witty.
The Daily Express says it's disgusting.
Oh, I should be cut to the quick if it's anything else.
The Daily Mirror, I regret to say, is a trifle carping.
Getting uppish, I see, naughty little thing.
Change and decay is gripping throughout. The characterization falters here and there, but the dialogue is polished and sustains a high level from first to last, and is frequently witty, nay, even brilliant.
Oh, I love nay.
But, here we go, dear, but the play on the whole is decidedly thin.
My God, they've noticed it.
Thin? Thin? What do they mean, thin?
Just thin, darling. Thin's thin the whole world over. You can't get away from it.
Would you call it thin?
Emaciated.
I shall write fat plays from now onwards. Fat plays filled with very fat people.
It ought to be self-evident, but it often isn't about people. What made Noel formidable was that he had this terrific self-conviction. Conviction of his own talent. He always used to say, I'm richly gifted, and at lunch that I was at, even richly gifted and highly talented. That was the phrase he used. It didn't seem arrogant either with him, but he said it an awful lot.
Coward was really the first great English performer to live in what we would see as modern celebrity. He said that he was the Beatles of his era, and he wasn't wrong. He was a phenomenon. Destiny's tot. And in that sense, he really, for the 20th century, caught the momentum of modern celebrity and lived it.
20th century blues, they're getting me down.
In 1926, he bought Goldenhurst, a large retreat in Kent, where within a few weeks he was recovering from a nervous breakdown.
Why, if there's a God in the sky, why shouldn't he grin?
But his main pleasure was to hold court and invite friends from the world of theatre and the arts to stay with him for the weekend.
20th century din, in the strange illusion.
It was a great treat to be asked to Goldenhurst. We used to go for weekends, be driven down a great big American car, and it was a fantastic weekend. It was no use just to get the Sunday papers and stay in bed and smoke 55 cigarettes, and that 2 hours in the morning was a joy. I mean, he was really marvellously funny, so I always remember him as a really terrific host. I think he preferred having a little bunch of actors there than anybody, you know. The silk dressing gown and the cigarette holder. I mean, Noel, that was the image, but Noel was carpet slippers, really, and steak and kidney pie and baked beans. You know, he ate the most filthy food. You know, he didn't like caviar or anything like that. He loved sausages and mash and baked beans and all the wrong things, and ate it constantly.
Goldenhurst was where he was able to be himself, away from the press and photographers. His personal life had to be kept private. He was homosexual, which was against the law until the 1960s. His first long relationship was with Jack Wilson, an American stockbroker, who was soon installed producing Coward's plays. To those who knew him, Coward made no secret of his sexual orientation.
I was about 18, and he rang me up. And he said, I think it's time you came round for a sex lecture. And I thought to myself, well, my sex is all right. I don't think I really need an awful lot of help from Noel. But anyway, lunch with Noel, you don't turn that down. I said, well, what a great idea. So round I went, 1 o'clock, and he came down after 5 or 10 minutes, and Coley, the secretary, brought in bacon and eggs. I was there for about 3 hours. We didn't discuss anything to do with my sex life, but I did hear a great deal about his. And he was, I must say, he was very disarming because he was very open about it. I mean, it was quite plain that men were his thing. That's it. But I think he said, I've done everything from soup to nuts, and I've ended up with men, and that's it.
In certain times, though, he must have been approached by people saying, look, it really would be better, Noel, if you married Joyce Carey, or, you know, we publicised your relationship with Gertrude Lawrence as being a sexual one, which it wasn't. As far as anyone I know who knew Coward knows or can say, he never had a sexual relationship with a woman. There was none of that pretense.
People had often suspected that Coward and Gertrude Lawrence were lovers. They were great friends from childhood and on stage formed the most effective and popular partnership that Coward ever shared.
Gertrude Lawrence, at her best, and with me, she was usually at her best, was the most brilliant comedian to play with. She was so swift, and her eyes were so true. And it was an enchantment to work with her.
She had this shimmering kind of sexual, sensuous elegance, like a perfume wafting over you. It was just terrific, terrific. And I saw absolutely then why Noel adored her. I mean, they were oil and water because Noel was disciplinarian to the point of mania. And she was the opposite, instinctive, would be giving terrible performances. If an affair she had fallen flat at 12 noon, she had a matinee to do, she would play the whole thing in a state of complete shock without being able to, and it would enrage Noel. He would walk off the stage in the interval and berate her, and they had terrific rows.
I'd always wanted to write a play for Gertie. Her contract with Charlot was up. And so she sent me a telegram saying, contract Charlot up, what about it, or something. And I wrote Private Lives in Shanghai in the Cathay Hotel very quickly and posted it back. And had a telegram back saying, read script, nothing wrong that can't be fixed. So I went back, the only thing's going to be fixed is your performance.
What are you doing here?
Private Lives, which he wrote in 1930, is the epitome of Coward's comic style. A few minutes of it survive on a recording he made the same year with Gertrude Lawrence.
Are you happy?
Perfectly.
Good.
Are you?
Ecstatically.
What's she like?
Fair. Very pretty. Plays the piano beautifully.
Very comforting.
How's yours?
I'd rather not discuss it.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter. He'll probably come popping out in a minute and I shall see for myself.
Have you known her long?
About 4 months. We met on a house party in Norfolk.
Very flat, Norfolk.
There's no need to be unpleasant.
There was no reflection on her, unless, of course, she made it flatter.
Your voice takes on an acid quality every time you mention her.
I swear I'll never mention her again.
Good. Now keep off yours.
You see, her use of voice. Yeah. Her use of voice, which was instinctive. Gertie was not a thinking reed, but her talent gave it all to her. She was the most intuitive, accurate, when she did not occasionally go overboard, which she was inclined to do.
Gertrude Lawrence's husband in Private Lives was Laurence Olivier. At the time, he suffered from a tendency to giggle on stage, but Coward's technique and strength of discipline was such that he found a way to cure it.
By deliberately saying, look, you're a giggler and I'm going to cure you, And I tell you how I'm going to do it, I warn you. I'm going to make you giggle all I can. And between Gertie and me, we can do it. Anytime we feel like it, we can kill you. And you know it. Now, I'm going to go on doing that. And at the end of the performance, I'm going to tick you off in front of the entire cast and the stage staff every time you do it. And you are going to learn not to. Took 7 months.
Coward's mastery of stage technique, along with the parts he wrote for himself, meant that by the end of the 30s, he'd perfected his public image as the sophisticated romantic lead.
First of all, he said, people are stars in the theatre in direct ratio to how many people want to go to bed with them. But then he went on to say, it's a strange thing, but if I was acting on the stage with Paul Schofield and Sir Alec Guinness, they would be acting me off the stage into the wings, outside into the street. But I have to tell you that nobody in the audience would be looking at them. They would all be looking at me. And I thought for a moment, and I thought, I mean, you often did with Noel, you listen to it and say, well, this is balls. But actually, there's a grain of truth about it, too. It's one of those imponderables and intangibles that Noel is right. He isn't the actor that they are. But he had this phenomenal charisma.
I could tell your fortune by your eyes, shall I?
I'd rather you didn't.
And your nose.
I'd rather you didn't mention my nose at all.
It's the most unwise nose I've ever seen.
Do stop.
And there's your mouth.
Please, Chris.
You'd be astounded if you knew how desperately I wanted to kiss your mouth again.
Chris.
Oh, you're so foolish up on your romantic high horse. How often have you ridden it wildly until it went lame and you had to walk home?
Often enough to teach me never to do it again.
That's what made the sadness in your eyes. You should never have left school. It was a grave mistake.
You win.
Do I?
I knew you would. Quite early in the evening.
Coward's whole life was dedicated to projecting an image of good manners. Here was a man who, to conventional people at the time, would be jumped up, ill-educated, and gay, and who was taking the whole society for a tumble and making them imitate him. People were writing about how he talked, and he defined a style. He invented a style.
I wonder what Act 2 has in store for us.
More overacting, I expect.
Nina from Argentina despised the tango. Although she never was a girl to let a man go, she wouldn't sacrifice her principles for sex. She looked with scorn on the gyrations of her relations who did the conga, and said that if she had to stand it any longer, she'd lose all dignity and wring their silly neck. She said that frankly she was blinded to all their over-advertised romantic charm. And then she got more bloody-minded and told them where to put their tropic palm. She said, I hate to be pedantic, but it drives me nearly frantic when I see that unromantic, sycophantic lot of sluts forever wriggling their guts. It drives me absolutely nuts. She's trying to begin, though they besought her to. And in language profane and obscene, she cursed the man who taught her to. She cursed Cole Porter, too.
By 1940, Noel Coward had written not only 32 plays, but 150 songs as well. Enough of them were published to wallpaper a room, albeit his lavatory, rechristened the Music Room. Mostly these were numbers from his plays and reviews, and if they were only a second string to his bow, still he stood comparison with Cole Porter or Ivor Novello, and yet he never learned to read or write music.
His music was much better, in my opinion, than Novello's, although Novello was far more musicianly and far more of an expert and knew much more about opera and so on. Noel didn't know a great deal about music, I don't think. And he once said that Mozart was like piddling through flannel or something, and then rather regretted having said it. He thought it was a bit cheap, which it was.
Oh dear. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out to the midday sun. The smallest Malay rabbit deplores this foolish habit in Hong Kong. They strike a gong and fire off an noonday gun to reprimand each inmate who's in late. In a jungle town where the sun beats down to the rage of man and beast, the English garb of the English South merely gets a bit more creased. In Bangkok, at 12 o'clock, they foam at the mouth and run. But mad dogs and Englishmen go out to the midday sun. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. The toughest Burmese bandit can never understand. In Rangoon, the heat of noon is just what the natives shun. They put their Scotch or rye down and lie down. In the jungle swamps where the python romps, there is peace from 12 till 2. Even caribous lie around and snooze with nothing else to do. In Bengal, to move at all is seldom, if ever, done. But mad dogs and Englishmen go out to the midday, 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 out to the midday.
It's the most wonderful piece of comic verse. And in fact, you know, you can read it as a piece of light verse, like you read Kipling or something. And other things, like, well, even though don't let's be beastly to the Germans. I mean, everyone pretended at the time to be shocked by it. And secretly, everyone thought exactly the same thing. It was very anti-German, and he had the nerve, and he had enormous courage, and it always goes with that sort of genius, or any, I think, tremendous personal courage.
Don't let's be beastly to the Germans when our victory is ultimately won. It was just those nasty nuts.
Coward's sardonic songs and wartime concerts for the troops earned him a place on the Nazi death list.
Let's be meek to them and turn the other cheek to them and try to bring out their latent sense of fun. Let's give them full air parity and treat the rats with charity, but don't let's be beastly to the Hun.
He learnt, as I did too, that playing to the troops during the war was a very mixed joy. And the antagonistic audiences, or rather shrugging shoulders audiences, were a great deal to learn from. And he never shirked that. And he would play and appear under the most difficult circumstances, whether he went well or not.
And the final insult was, you know, when he went to Churchill and said, what can I do for England? And I suppose he expected to be made ambassador to Washington or something or other, and something really useful for the war effort. He was told to go out and play Mad Dogs and Englishmen. And it must have been absolutely infuriating if you wanted to be taken seriously in a different context.
Coward's reputation as a frivolous playboy was originally cancelled out by Cavalcade, a theatrical phenomenon with a cast of hundreds. It dealt with the fortunes of two families between the Boer and First World Wars.
Cavalcade had an extraordinary effect, and I was absolutely mad about it, of course, when it came out. It was just at the right moment, and that certainly was an absolutely sincere and enchanting idea, combined with an extraordinary dramatic sense of picture and spectacle and emotion, everything together. It really was a triumph, I think, and deserved everything that it, although people afterwards said it was jingoistic and sentimental and so on, it had absolutely the right effect at the right moment and was his great achievement, I think.
The success of Cavalcade led Coward to attempt a Navy version in 1942 and to star in it himself. The result was In Which We Serve, possibly his most successful film.
Well, you know what I like now? Nice hot cup of tea. I'd like a nice beer myself. Look out! Here come the bastards back again!
Keep your heads down, get as low as you can.
Miss Butterfingers! Darn it! I spoke too soon.
Lord Louis Mountbatten was a very great friend of Noel's, and I think that it happened because they were talking about the Kelly, the destroyer, Mountbatten's destroyer, which was a very famous destroyer that went right through and then got sunk off Crete. And I think that's how it happened. And Noel used, as you know, all Lord Louis' speeches in the movie and then played the part.
Here comes the dawn of a new day, Flags, and I shouldn't be surprised if it were a fairly uncomfortable one.
Yes, sir. It's a very pretty sky, sir. Somebody sent me a calendar rather like that last Christmas.
Did it have a squadron of Dorniers in the upper right-hand corner?
No, sir.
That's where art parts company with reality.
Yes, I'm afraid you're right, sir. Cigarette?
Thanks.
Mountbatten took a close interest in the film, even inviting the King and Queen, along with the Princesses Margaret and Elizabeth, onto the set at Rank Studios at Denham. He also provided 200 serving sailors to act as extras and viewed the rushes with Noel Coward every weekend to check for inaccuracies in the way the Navy was depicted.
Well, Blake, Thermal, how are you feeling?
Fine, sir, thank you.
Got concussed a bit, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I think I did, sir.
The first lieutenant tells me that you stood by the gun even when most of the crew were knocked out. Is that true?
Well, sir, somebody had to do it, sir.
You did damn well. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you, sir.
I want to see my captain.
All right, old man. I'm here. Don't try to talk. Just rest.
He brought the theatre discipline into the studios. I mean, on the first morning of shooting, a certain actor was about 10 minutes late. And Noel said, this isn't good enough. This wouldn't happen in the theatre. He said, what's your name? Pointed to a young man called Michael Anderson, right? The director. He was then the third assistant. He said, go and put the moustache on and go and play the Marine.
Coward co-directed the picture with a young film editor, David Lean.
Acting was a kind of mystery to me. And Noel, of course, was simply wonderful at that. He was wonderful with actors. And I took over the technical thing. I decided where the camera was, what lens to use, and Noel took over the actors. Well, I said I was lucky. I was lucky because Noel became terribly easily bored. And he got bored very soon. And when he wasn't acting in one of the scenes, he wasn't there. So I handled the whole damn thing. You know, great piece of luck.
You know what's happened, don't you?
Further pictures followed. Another collaboration with David Lean turned Coward's one-act play, Still Life, into Brief Encounter.
I've fallen in love with you.
Yes, I know.
Tell me honestly. Please tell me honestly if what I believe is true.
What do you believe?
That it's the same with you. That you've fallen in love too.
Sounds so silly.
Why?
I know you're so little.
But in the late 1940s, good new plays were not forthcoming. Coward had always found he wrote best when abroad, in hotels or on board ship, and he travelled increasingly now.
When the storm clouds are riding through a winter sky, sail away, sail away. When the love light is fading in your sweetheart's eye, sail away, sail away. When you feel your song is orchestrated wrong, why should you prolong your stay? When the wind and the weather blow your dreams sky high, sail away, sail away, sail away.
He lived extravagantly and travelled all round the world with his friends on exotic winter holidays. Though he travelled the Far East, Europe and the Americas, it was Bermuda and Jamaica that became his favourites. Finally, he decided to move abroad, attracting criticism in the press for doing so. But why did he go?
A very simple answer in 2 words. Income tax.
In 1948, he bought his first house in Jamaica, accompanied by his young partner, Graham Payne.
We used to go up there in the evenings, and the fireflies used to come out. It was unbelievable how big they were and how many of them. And we used to go up there with all the visitors, and take a nice good old flask of the dry martini and sit and just look at the view and the sun going down. And people used to say, oh, you know, it's these martinis are very strong. And I said, no, it's the altitude. Anyway, he loved us up there so much that he bought a bit of land from a friend of his called Blanche Blackwell, who owned it, and built a little house.
A room with a view and you.
He called his second house Firefly and wrote some of his later plays here. He finally became a tax exile in 1956, but was never completely content away from England.
Something did go. Not only did he begin to have bad health, but I think his touch with everybody in the theatre and the life he led in London was something he couldn't forget.
With the best will in the world, you aren't in touch the way you are when you're in Benenden or wherever he was, in Kent and Gerald Road in London, soaking up the atmosphere.
In the 50s, Coward wrote 7 new plays, but they still weren't successful. He'd had flops before, though, and wasn't unduly disconcerted by this new string of failures. At the opening night of Sirocco, he went onto the stage at the end to face his hostile audience.
I knew I was the one they were after. So I went on and didn't look at the audience at all. I turned my behind to them and shook hands with Ivor and kissed Bunny Doble, and then turned and did the most irritating thing in the world. And stood practically, happily crucified and refused to let the curtain come down. I thought, I wonder how long they can go on without their larynxes going. And they booed, and they booed, and they booed, and sure enough, it finally died away because they got tired.
But if his plays were failing, Coward still had other strings to his bow.
When his plays couldn't find an audience, or a good audience, a solid audience, he simply abandoned his plays and launched himself on the public as a sort of a turn. And his review, his songs, made him an enormous success in America, naturally, where his brand of unbridled individualism have found more favor than here. And his swank, you know, in America, a definition of a genius is anyone from England, that worked a treat.
I like America. I have played around every slappy, happy hunting ground, and I find America okay. I've been about a bit, but I must admit...
He went to Las Vegas in 1955 to launch upon the gamblers his idiosyncratic brand of cabaret. It was like entertaining the troops again, except that here he was an unqualified success.
In Dallas, Texas, they talk of sex, but only think of oil. New Jersey dames go up in flames if someone mentions bed. In Chicago, Illinois, any girl who meets a boy giggles and shoots him dead. But I like America.
I suppose he was a little more exotic for them. It was a sort of bird of paradise suddenly transplanted into Wilbur Stark's Desert Inn or wherever he performed down there. But, you know, the whole of Hollywood flew in, and he had one of the most enormous successes of his life.
Frank Sinatra, who was a great buddy, flew several people in, Judy Garland and a few others, Merle Oberon, and so on, that came for the first night. And Frank Sinatra said on the radio the next day, if you want to hear how a song should be sung, go to the Desert Inn and see Noel Coward.
The only surviving film of him singing is from a 1955 television special he made with Mary Martin.
In Texas, they've only got the brassest rhythm, and they like a tune with wow and zip, and it's something with some bip, yip, and it rhythm has them rolling on the floor. They first heard some blue notes, somebody played a few notes, Texan asked for any more. I'd love a chart of how they brought the art of bebop to the heart of Texas. Bebop, mambo, samba, conga too. Day by day the urge is stronger to give those guys who don't like fun around one big Texan rhythmic run around. Give them something to collapse about when those cowboys flap their chaps about deep, 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 deep in the sleepy heart of Texas. But
while he was busy in America being a star turn, the world of British theatre was changing. the well-made drawing-room play was swept aside by the angry young men of the royal court. The revolution was like the one Coward had caused 30 years earlier with the Vortex, but he simply couldn't come to terms with it.
Nowadays, a well-constructed play with a beginning and a middle and an end is despised. A light comedy whose sole purpose is to amuse is dismissed as trivial and insignificant. Since when has laughter been so insignificant? No merriment, apparently, must scratch the grim, set patina of these dire years. We must just sit around and wait for death, or hurry it on, according to how we feel.
Well, I understood it absolutely, but he pitched into people like myself, saying we were all badly dressed and we didn't know how to behave ourselves, and we all dropped our H's and everything, which wasn't entirely true. But, and he went, I think it was about 3 weeks of them, and finally I did get slightly fed up with it, and I wrote him a note, and I said, you know, we're all in the same trade, and I think you should leave us alone because there's room for you and there's room for us. And I had this marvellous letter back from him, and he said, you know, you're absolutely right. It's very vulgar and common of me, and I shouldn't talk like that at all.
Noel Coward went to great lengths to try to patch up things with Osborne, but the damage was done. He was reviled for his elitist views, even though he was now recanting.
There's room for everything in the theatre. I think there's still room for a drama or a comedy or play about kitchen sinks, if necessary, or tramps, or that's fine, providing they're good enough. I also think that there's still room for a charming upper middle class family who have hearts and limbs and feel and think just the same as anybody else does, and even dukes and duchesses, there are still a few extant.
Coward was now on the wrong side of the dilemma he'd foreseen 20 years earlier in his play Present Laughter, where a successful older playwright, another persona for Coward, was faced by an earnest young writer.
What you don't realise is that the theatre of the future is the theatre of ideas.
That may be, but at the moment I'm occupied with the theatre of the present.
And what do you do with it? Every play you appear in is exactly the same. Superficial, frivolous, and without the slightest intellectual significance. You have a great following and a strong personality, and all you do is prostitute yourself every night of your life. All you do with your talent is to wear dressing gowns and make witty remarks, when you might really be helping people, making them think, making them feel.
There can be no two opinions about it. I'm having a most discouraging morning.
Coward continued working well into his 60s and wrote the same character into his 1965 play, Song at Twilight, with which he had a modest success. Through the ageing playwright Hugo Latimer, Coward can at last discuss an issue of great concern to himself.
According to the law in England, homosexuality is still a penal offence.
In the light of modern psychiatry and in the opinion of most sensible and unprejudiced people, that law has become archaic and nonsensical.
Nevertheless, it exists.
Well, it won't exist much longer.
Maybe so. But even if the actual law ceases to exist, there will be a stigma attached to the love that dare not speak its name in the minds of millions of people for generations to come. It takes more than a few outspoken books and plays and speeches in Parliament to uproot moral prejudice from the Anglo-Saxon mind.
He raises a theme, and we see that he feels something strongly about it. And the issue really is that the character, Hugo Latimer, admits that his life would have been happier, that perhaps he would have been a better writer had he been able to admit this. But he didn't, and he couldn't. But still, Coward is sticking, even at the end of his life, very much to the issue of himself, which was his one big, bright idea. His great creation was Noel Coward.
At retirement age, Noel Coward, the mythical figure, was making a comeback. He received an enormous boost when Laurence Olivier invited him to direct a revival of his 1924 play Hay Fever at the National Theatre. His frivolous 20s style proved well suited to the 60s.
Methods? What methods?
Well, you're far too pleasant to occupy yourself with the commonplace.
And you'll spoil yourself by trying to be too clever.
Thank you.
Anyhow, I don't know what you mean by the commonplace.
Oh, you mean you want me to explain?
Not at all.
Very well, I will.
I shan't listen.
You'll pretend not to, but you'll hear every word, really.
Oh, you're so inscrutable and quizzical, just exactly what a feminine psychologist should be.
Yes, aren't
You
I?
frighten me dreadfully.
No, darling.
Oh, don't call me darling.
Well, that's unreasonable. You've been trying to make me the whole evening.
Oh, your conceit is outrageous.
Not conceit at all. You've been firmly buttering me up because you want a nice little intrigue.
How dare you?
It's perfectly true. If it weren't, you wouldn't be so cross.
I think you are insufferable.
Oh, Myra, dear Myra.
Don't touch me.
Oh, come along. Let's have that nice little intrigue. The only reason I've been so annoying is that I love to see things as they are first and then pretend they're what they're
Yes,
not.
words, masses and masses of words.
Yes, well, they're great fun to play.
I am glad you think so. Personally, they bore me stiff.
Myra, don't be statuesque.
Yes, let go of my
You're
hand.
charming.
Let go of
I
my
won't.
hand. You will.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
The revival was an instant success and transformed his fortunes again. The press and public seemed surprised at just how good a writer he was.
I think people realise that he isn't that Saturday afternoon coach party playwright that we have been given to believe existed. He's an infinitely more complex, infinitely more satisfying, infinitely more modern writer than that.
More of his early plays were revived, and Coward found himself a fashionable celebrity again. In 1969, the Savoy hosted an extravagant 70th birthday party for him, and a number of illustrious colleagues and friends turned out to pay tribute. Further honours followed. He was finally knighted in 1970.
It might go to my head terribly, and I might cut everybody dead, but I think it's unlikely.
Thank you, sir.
But his health was already beginning to fail, and he had a succession of illnesses.
I mean, he said to me once that they're insisting on exercise, walking. And I said, well, quite right, too. He said, I don't like it. I don't like exercise. He said, my idea of a good afternoon's exercise is 50 Turkish cigarettes and a box of marron glacé. When I last saw him, it was it's the first time I'd really seen him cowed because he was on sticks. And he said, I've just had a huge stone taken out of my kidneys. It's so large, I'm taking it round to Fabergé to have it mounted. And which I thought was rather stylish.
He went back to Jamaica to die, and finally, in 1973, he suffered a fatal heart attack. He was buried at Firefly in a private ceremony, attended only by local friends, his secretary, and his partner of 30 years, Graham Payne. He had no other family.
Well, I just miss him, period, you know. He was such good company to be with. Never depressed for long, there he was. He covered it up very, very quickly. He was such good company. Just about the best friend I ever had in my life. Great man.
Quite a lot of people said, what a pity that I wasn't more significant. But that never worried me because I didn't really particularly wish to be significant. I like to be contemporary and bright as a button, but I don't think I was all that keen on being significant.
In 1984, Noel Coward was remembered in a service at Westminster Abbey, where a stone was unveiled in Poets' Corner commemorating his life.
And that's the happiness I've known alone. I travel alone. Sometimes I'm east, sometimes I'm west. No chains can ever bind me. No remembered love can ever find me. I travel alone. There go the places and faces I've known. When the dream is ended and passion has flown, I travel alone. Free from love's illusion, my heart is my own. I travel